BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Friday, another Cooper Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Fridays, I talk to you guys about D.B. Cooper, the man responsible for the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. aviation history. And in this episode, I will be discussing Duane Weber as a D.B. Cooper suspect. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about D.B. Cooper. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. D.B. Cooper is a criminal who has evaded the authorities for over 50 years, and Duane Weber is a suspect that I should have covered much earlier on Cooper Friday. He is mentioned in a lot of the discussions, but I think the overall impression from Cooper Sleuths and the Vortex is Duane Weber is not the worst suspect, but he's also not the best suspect. He is somewhere in the middle, and as I understand, Ryan Burns over on the D.B. Cooper Sleuth channel has created a matrix or a system to rank the viability of D.B. Cooper suspects, and some of them receive a 12, which is very high, and Duane Weber receives a 6, which is somewhat in the middle, and then a suspect who would be very low could be a 1, or even lower than that. So he is somewhat of a mid-ranking suspect. But let's hear more about Duane Weber to provide the most basic introduction. Duane L. Weber was born in 1924 and died in 1995. He was a World War II Army veteran who served time in at least 6 prisons from 1945 to 1968 for burglary and forgery. He was proposed as a suspect by his widow, Jo, and as we're going to see, Jo Weber is going to be mentioned almost as frequently as Duane Weber in this episode. And after being proposed, this was primarily because of a deathbed confession. 3 days before he died in 1995, Duane Weber told his wife, "I am Dan Cooper." The name meant nothing to her, she said, but months later a friend told her of its significance in the hijacking. She went to her local library to research D.B. Cooper and found Max Gunther's book and discovered notations in the margins in her husband's handwriting. Like the hijacker, Weber drank bourbon and chain-smoked. Other circumstantial evidence included a 1979 trip to Seattle and the Columbia River, where his wife remembered him showing a trash bag just upstream of Tina Bar. Ralph Hummelsbach, who was assigned to the case, said that Duane Weber does fit the physical description and does have the criminal background that I have always felt was associated with the case, but did not believe that Duane Weber was D.B. Cooper. The FBI eliminated Weber as an active suspect in July of 1998 when his fingerprints did not match any of those that proceeded in the hijacked plane, and no other direct evidence could be found to implicate him. Later, his DNA also failed to match samples that were recovered from D.B. Cooper's tie. Alright, so that's the most basic thing that you can find online. So much to respond to even with that. And one thing that I've noticed about YouTube is there doesn't seem to be too much coverage on Duane Weber as a D.B. Cooper suspect, but there is a fair amount that is in the world of print, which I will be discussing in this episode. And thank you to everyone who listened to last week's Cooper Friday where I was discussing the D.B. Cooper DNA. You just heard something there about a comparison between the DNA that they have on file and Duane Weber's DNA, but if you didn't hear last week's Cooper Friday, I am going to save you the trouble and just say that I don't think it's reliable. And I don't mean to be some type of giant sourpuss, but in all of the true crime cases that I cover here on Black Box Online Radio, such as the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, and D.B. Cooper, there are DNA samples and DNA on record for all of those cases, and in all of them, I think the DNA evidence is unreliable. It's questionable. That doesn't mean it's completely useless. It means that there are these giant clouds of uncertainty around the DNA evidence. So that's one reason to keep discussing D.B. Cooper as a suspect. And also, in addition to my Monday show about the Zodiac Killer and the Wednesday show about Jack the Ripper, I also come live to you guys Tuesdays and Thursdays at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. You can start your day with some true crime. And if you want to support all of these efforts, in addition to hitting the like button and subscribing, you can go through some of the links in the description box. One of them is for buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. But some of the immediate points about Duane Weber as a D.B. Cooper suspect. He was born in 1924, and I'm not a math person, but I'm going to try my best here. The D.B. Cooper skyjacking occurred on November 24th of 1971, so he would have been 47 years old. And again, I'm not a math person, but that is possible. That's plausible because a lot of people estimate that D.B. Cooper was in his mid 40s, and even the age that has been proposed most frequently has been 44, so that's not completely out of line. But my immediate first impression of looking at Duane Weber was I noticed that in the majority of the photos that they use to compare to the D.B. Cooper composite sketches, they show him from a side view. They have to show some type of tilted angle with the camera. They don't use the photos of him head on to compare to the D.B. Cooper composite sketches, and you will see this frequently. Maybe there's some out there that have a frontal image of him, like where he's looking directly at the camera, and then the composite sketch that is also looking directly forward. But they seem to show that the similarities that he has to the composite sketches are only really visible when his head is tilted to the side and they're at an angle. And just thought that was so bizarre, because when I look at a standalone photo of Duane Weber, I begin to think, no, absolutely not. This guy doesn't resemble any of the composites. But that's just my take on the subject, and you can weigh in the comment section down below if you think that this guy resembles D.B. Cooper at all. And please stick around to the end of the episode because I'm trying to make Cooper Friday more dynamic, and I want to respond to some of the things on the most recent D.B. Cooper Sleuth livestream, as well as an ongoing discussion about the psychological profile of D.B. Cooper. But back in 2000, there was an article that was written on CBS News, and it really has become the foundation and source for other articles online. Like I would find other quote unquote supporting pieces of news coverage, and a lot of them had just copy and pasted this CBS News article right here, which I'm going to read for you in the second. It was posted August 22nd of 2000. A Florida widow believes that she may have solved one of the most mysterious crimes in U.S. history, the only successful hijacking of a plane in the United States, by looking into the past of her late husband. A CBS News correspondent, Byron Pitts, reports that Joe Weber now believes that the man she married and knew as Duane Weber was in fact D.B. Cooper, the man who hijacked a 727 in 1921 and demanded $200,000, and then parachuted out the back of the plane, never to be seen again. Now 60 years old, again in the year 2000, Joe Weber says that she knows the slick-looking, smooth-talking insurance salesman she fell in love with lived a lie, and she claims he kept a legendary secret. On November 24th of 1971, a man wearing a black suit with a ticket in the name, Dan Cooper, boarded a Northwest Orient Airlines jet in Portland, Oregon, carrying a note and a bomb. After passing a note to the flight attendant that said, "Miss, I have a bomb," Cooper forced the plane to land in Seattle at Tacoma Airport. Well, I mean, that isn't exactly ever... That's a half-truth. Cooper wanted to go to Seattle. I mean, that's the destination of the plane. There he received his money, released the passengers, and ordered the light crew to take the air again and fly south. Hours later, at 10,000 feet in the air, somewhere over the Cascade Mountains in Washington state, the fugitive who became known as D.B. Cooper dove out the back end of the plane with a parachute and $200,000 in cash, and a manhunt and legend were born. After his exploits made the news, people wrote songs, books, and movies, and sold T-shirts about him. But the manhunt never found any prey. Local law enforcement concluded that Cooper either got away or left a big hole in the ground. But Joe Weber believes he got away and kept his daring crime and secret identity to himself until the hours of his death. Hospitalized in Florida with kidney disease, Duane Weber motioned to his wife to come close. After 17 years of marriage, there was something she needed to know. He says, "Come here, come closer." He wanted me to face him about 2 feet from his face, Joe Weber recalls. He says, "I have a secret to tell you." I said, "What?" He says, "I'm Dan Cooper." Since her husband's death in 1995, Joe Weber started to piece together the clues dropped over the years. Joe recalled the sleep-talking nightmare Duane had about leaving fingerprints on a plane, an old knee injury that he claimed he got from jumping out of the back of the plane, and the local library book on D.B. Cooper with Duane Weber's handwriting in the margins, the items she stumbled across during 17 years of marriage. And I'm going to save you guys some time, and I'm going to jump right into that and explain everything. So he makes a confession to her while he's on his deathbed, right? This is a couple days before he dies. A few days before he dies, he says, I am Dan Cooper, and she doesn't know what that means at the time. This other thing here, though, about sleep talking nightmare, he says that he is just talking about how he is upset that he left fingerprints on the plane, but he's saying that in his sleep. So why exactly would he be saying that if that has if that is something that he is doing unconsciously? You might be saying that, well, anyone can confess to the crime, but this wouldn't even be when he is awake. And then the item that she found was a Northwest Orient airline ticket. And you also heard that statement from the introduction that she believes that he gave her a tour of Tina Bar, and he brought her to the place where money was found from D.B. Cooper's skyjacking in 1980. $6,000 were found at Tina Bar. So this stuff does seem to make sense. But some of you may be listening to the lack of enthusiasm in my voice about how and why we should take these confessions seriously. Just because somebody has confessed to having committed the skyjacking and that they were D.B. Cooper does not mean they were actually Cooper. We have Walter Recca confessing on tape to being D.B. Cooper. We have Wolfgang Gossett confessing to have been Cooper. Not all of these people could have been D.B. Cooper. So I think that this is something that we need to approach with skepticism, not just be like, well, I mean, he did say that he was Dan Cooper, therefore he most likely was. No. Even Barb Dayton provided detailed explanations about how and why she committed the skyjacking, and not all of these people can be the culprit. Let's hear another quotation from Joe Weber. I can't walk away from it, Joe says now. Why would he have an old Northwest airline ticket? Why would he take me to a place where eventually the money was found? Why all of this? There are too many pieces of the puzzle that fit. It's a puzzle, Ralph Himmelsbach said as well. Ralph Himmelsbach was the agent assigned to the case 29 years ago. Again, this is the year 2000. Now retired, he believes Joe Weber's story may have credibility. He does match the physical description, Himmelsbach said. He does have the criminal background that I've always thought was associated with the case. Now, there's some things that I think about that are going to be much more important in terms of the psychological profiling, and I'll talk about this at the end of the episode, because it's an ongoing discussion that I've been having with you guys here on Cooper Friday. And as far as being a criminal in the past, having a criminal background, maybe that is something that I'm very undecided on, and I'm not some type of D.B. Cooper expert. I'm a newcomer to the case, and I talk about that all the time. But in terms of looking at criminal behavior and psychological profiling, the other things that I think are going to be much more important are, did he have a background in aviation? Did he have a background with the military? And we know that he did. I already told you he was a World War II veteran. And did he have some type of grudge going on? And as far as some type of criminal background, I'm not 100% convinced that that's a necessary component to having perpetuated the skyjacking, because what we look for with skyjackers, and you'll hear a lot about this in the book The Skyjacker by Dr. David G. Hubbard, is that they are underperformers in life who are trying to achieve a sense of glory. Sometimes there is a prime financial motive, other times the financial motive is secondary, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they've had intense criminal backgrounds before. Now, let's get back to the article. A forensic artist who worked with the FBI says the physical similarities between a composite sketch of Cooper and a young Duane Weber are striking, but in the end, Himmelsbach and most in law enforcement believe that D.B. Cooper died of his injuries he suffered when he jumped out of the plane. Joe Weber has a hard time believing that explanation. And this is going to be the foundation for the pop culture understanding of D.B. Cooper for the next 15 years. This article came out in 2000. And so many people believe that. I've talked to you guys very frequently about this. When I first learned about D.B. Cooper, it was 2011, 2012, maybe even 2013, thereabouts, and there were all of these YouTube videos that would include D.B. Cooper in some of the most mysterious crimes of the 20th century. And they would say, experts believe that Cooper could not have survived the jump because he was wearing loafers, he didn't have any gloves, he didn't have any goggles. And the more we look into the D.B. Cooper case, the more we find that all of those things appear to be either untrue or they are just possibilities. For starters, it appears that Cooper was wearing a form of brown boots as opposed to loafers. Secondarily, Cooper was carrying a mystery bag. You even heard the introductory statement that he boarded the plane with a bomb in the briefcase, but what they often leave out is that Cooper had a mystery bag which could have contained gloves and goggles, and even the D.B. Cooper film from 1981, The Pursuit of D.B. Cooper, featured Cooper jumping with goggles. So there are a lot of these types of pop culture conceptions that people have about D.B. Cooper that just perpetuate this absolute certainty that he had to have died in the jump. And people from the authorities, such as Ralph Himmelsbach here, but more importantly, Larry Carr, are also just saying that, yeah, Cooper had to have died in the jump. And one person who absolutely disagrees with that is Joe Weber, who says, I have not seen one piece of evidence that supports that. No body, no bones, no parachute, nothing. I'll give you that one, Joe. I will give you that one indeed. In fact, one of the only traces of Cooper was money that was found on the Columbia River in 1980. Whatever his fate was, the air travel has never been the same since the Cooper hijacking, and now planes are equipped with a Cooper vane that prevents the use of a rear stairway during the flight. And overall, I think that the ranking of a mid-level suspect is somewhat fair in this situation. But let's continue with the online discussions. And we have a post about Duane Weber on the D.B. Cooper Suspects WordPress that says, the strengths for Duane Weber to have been D.B. Cooper are that he was a career criminal, so he had the mindset to commit a crime. He provides an explanation for the Tina Bar money find, and I'm actually going to say that that is a very strong point. And I mean, obviously you can tell that I have a certain degree of skepticism when it comes to looking at Duane Weber, but the Tina Bar money find is a strong point. If everything that Joe Weber says is accurate, that he actually brought her there and he was talking about it, and he's pointing out things on the Columbia River at Tina Bar. And like the hijacker, Weber drank bourbon and chain smoked. This is something that I will disagree with. D.B. Cooper did not chain smoke. He smoked 7 Raleigh filter tip cigarettes, and one of the cigarettes was smoked by Tina Mucklow. That should have been the 8th cigarette, and I would hardly call that chain smoking when Cooper is on the plane for hours. I mean, we're talking about hours and hours. The 36-minute flight from Portland to Seattle turned into a flight that was over 2 hours. I wouldn't say that D.B. Cooper was chain smoking by going through only 8 cigarettes. I think a chain smoker would have gone through a lot more than that. But Cooper drank bourbon and Duane Weber drank bourbon. This is something that people have tried to bring to my attention from the very start of Cooper Friday. That is, just saying that somebody smoked and somebody drank does not constitute as evidence. And at this point, I'm starting to agree with that. Sometimes I can be like, all right, well, I see your point. Maybe if somebody absolutely never smoked at all, I could understand that a little bit more. But just saying that, well, they smoked and they drank, that should count as evidence? Not quite. And he talked about the hijacking in his sleep. Again, I think that that's a reasonable point, but I'll challenge it later on. And then he acted in a suspicious manner while visiting casinos. He could have possibly laundered the ransom money. All right, fair point, except that's what we would call a call for speculation. Now, the weaknesses, and this is perhaps going to be the most important part of this episode here on Cooper Friday, and that is that Duane Weber had humongous ears. Oh my goodness, we have it all the time, and already I bet there's somebody in the comment section who's about to type it out by saying his ears looked like satellite dishes. That is a simile that comes up very frequently in the true crime world, not only talking about the D.B. Cooper case, but also in the Zodiac case. No D.B. Cooper witness is known to have observed that in the hijacker, and this is something very important. I am not going to act like, well, this is just some type of silly statement that people are making. It's just a superficial observation, and it's a weak point to challenge. No. When you look at a photo of Duane Weber for the first time, you will probably notice his humongous ears. I'm not trying to put him down or anything, not trying to body shame him, but that is something that I really thought about. He has very large ears, and as I said, from that full frontal view, when you look at him in a head-on photo, he doesn't resemble the composites at all, in my opinion, and I would totally welcome that, because we're going to have a lot of disputes about the D.B. Cooper composites, as we're going to see. DNA failed to match samples recovered from D.B. Cooper's tie. I've already told you, I think the DNA is all questionable, and he had a discernible accent. I mean, something like that, though, could be covered up. And I just want to point out, though, one additional point about this talking in his sleep. D.B. Cooper, well, let's just get to Duane Weber first, actually. Duane Weber goes to the library and he's reading Max Gunther's book and he's writing notes in the margins. And he's talking in his sleep about leaving fingerprints on the plane, and he wished he hadn't done that. Is there any possible way that he was talking in his sleep because he had read Max Gunther's book and became fascinated with the D.B. Cooper story and just was thinking about that while he was sleeping? Because I've been half asleep, and I've been completely asleep sometimes. And I've said some things to my fiance that I don't remember saying, and it turns out it's completely false information, like being in a part of the world that I've never visited before. And I'm like, what? No, no, that's not true. I've never been there. So sometimes people are kind of thinking about some type of dreamscape as opposed to reality, and that would definitely not be admissible in a court of law, to the best of my opinion. If someone's going to be like, well, he was talking in his sleep and he said he left fingerprints on the plane, he could have been having a dream about being D.B. Cooper as opposed to have actually been D.B. Cooper, and he could have been thinking about it all day because he was the one who had read Max Gunther's book. So when we put those variables in order, you can follow that in a sequence to think that, all right, he confessed to have been D.B. Cooper because maybe he had a habitual habit of lying, even on his deathbed. Maybe he wanted to be Cooper, but he wasn't actually Cooper. And one more time, I would like to visit Martin Andrade's website, martinandrade.wordpress.com, and he has a post out here called Duane Weber is not D.B. Cooper. And I think this is rather similar to the debunking series that I did for the Zodiac Killer suspects. Of course, it wasn't real debunking, it's just a name. It's providing the reasons why I think that person was not the perpetrator, and he has done some other ones of these. Once again, martinandrade.wordpress.com if you would like to read some more skeptical challenges to the suspect profiles. And this is called Duane Weber is not D.B. Cooper. One of the most prolific posters in the original Drop Zone forum on the D.B. Cooper case, and otherwise consummate Cooper gadfly, is Jo Weber. Well known to most of the independent sleuths of the case, she claims that her deceased husband, Duane Weber, gave her a deathbed confession and told her that he was Dan Cooper, and this led Jo on the road to spending the next 2 decades investigating the case. While her story changes as needed, her primary introduction to the case came when she read Max Gunther's book. She even claims to have contacted Gunther and convinced Clara, the woman who gave the story to Gunther, that was an ex-girlfriend of Duane's. She also contacted Ralph Himmelsbach, who either encouraged her or at least humored her enough for her to continue her claim that Duane Weber was D.B. Cooper. She was the catalyst to starting the thread on the Drop Zone forum and posted nearly every day for 7 years. As interesting as her story was, Duane Weber is not D.B. Cooper. While he does roughly match the physical description, and I'm going to repeat something, I'm going to throw in my own interjection here, roughly matches the descriptions. He had very large ears. Okay, there are the ears again. And there's something that they would have noticed and remembered. I agree with that completely. Duane could not be put anywhere near the Pacific Northwest at the time of the hijacking, and there's no evidence that he had any knowledge of the 727 or the airline business in general. Now, these are major points because I'm going to get to the heart of the issue. I think D.B. Cooper knew a lot about the airline business. I think he knew a lot about aviation. He clearly demonstrated knowledge of a Boeing 727. But as far as this thing about you could not place him near the Pacific Northwest, please stick around to the psychological profile segment at the end because I'm going to talk about that. And the tie evidence also contradicts Weber, since Weber never worked in any industry that used metallic particles, and metallic particles are found on D.B. Cooper's tie. And as I've said, in every episode of Cooper Friday, I want to bring something to our attention, and that is that just because they found metallic particles on D.B. Cooper's tie does not mean that that is the answer to everything in this case or in this mystery. But I think Martin Andrade for that all the same. Right now, I would like to turn it over to you guys and just ask, what do you think about Duane Weber as a D.B. Cooper suspect? And Please put your answers in the comment section down below. One more time, you can send larger thanks to me at blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. But I said that I wanted to incorporate multiple things into Cooper Friday, so I would also like to look at some comments that were left on a recent DB Cooper Sleuth live stream that is run by Ryan Burns. And if you have not subscribed yet to the DB Cooper Sleuth channel, I absolutely hope that you will. Ryan makes great content over there. And the first one is going to talk about the DB Cooper composite sketches. And I know that this might be one of the most widely discussed aspects of the D.B. Cooper mystery, the composites. Does this person resemble the sketches or do they not? And composite sketches are not going to be a perfect match. I think all of us, even newcomers to the Vortex, even people who are just casually following the D.B. Cooper case, are going to say that, okay, I get it, no one's going to fit perfectly like a glove, or like a mask, I should say, but there is some reason why these composites were created. And he was discussing a D.B. Cooper suspect named Wolfgang Gossett, whom I have a standalone episode about here on this channel. And Wolfgang Gossett is the one that I call the dark horse. I'm not completely convinced that he was D.B. Cooper. He's not even my top suspect. I would put suspects such as Skip Hall or Ted Braden above Wolfgang Gossett. But I would not be surprised for a second if Wolfgang Gossett was D.B. Cooper. And the comments that were made about him are in regards to D.B. Cooper Composite B. And Ryan Burns said that he thought that Wolfgang Gossett did not resemble Composite B. And I would invite anybody to challenge me on this. And Ryan, if you hear this, please challenge me as well. My biggest point of contention is, I think what throws people off about Wolfgang Gossett and D.B. Cooper Composite B, the Cary Grant sketch, is the nose. I completely admit that he has a different nose shape, but I also notice a very similar jawline, very similar cheekbones, and Ryan pointed out that he has a very different lower lip, but I think the upper lip is also very similar, and of course the one that Ryan even admitted, the hairline, the forehead, I think all of those things are very, very similar. And that's one thing that I keep in mind about Wolfgang Gossett. But, I mean, Ryan Burns did bring up an even more important point than the challenge questions, than just the challenge questions in regards to the composite sketches. Do you think he resembles the composite or not? And that is that Wolfgang Gossett did confess to having been D.B. Cooper, the same way that Duane Weber did. But Wolfgang Gossett was also a wild storyteller. Duane Weber was also a career criminal. Sometimes people don't always tell the truth, and that is one thing that we're just going to experience time and time again in the world of the Vortex. But I would love to know what you guys think. And another issue that was brought up on the D.B. Cooper Sleuth channel is about a different suspect, Lauren Skip Hall. Skip Hall is one that I've discussed recently here on Cooper Friday. I also have a standalone episode about him, and all of these are getting assembled into a suspect playlist, like the individual episodes about suspects are in playlists here on Black Box Online Radio. And the question is Skip Hall too attractive to have been D.B. Cooper? And you, ladies, weigh in the comment section, because I genuinely have a problem with this when it comes to rating men's attractiveness, and apparently certain suspects have been dismissed because they are deemed to have been too attractive to have been D.B. Cooper, because the flight attendants, particularly Tina Mucklow and Florence Schaffner, were just like, Cooper was not an attractive man. But with Skip Hall, when I heard the video and audio recordings of him speak, he definitely gave off a type of confidence that made me think about a Hollywood actor. He seemed very comfortable with public speaking, and Ryan Burns even compared him to Clark Gable or another famous actor. So I think that this is something that is not, it's not easy to dismiss. Skip Hall really does give off that impression of someone who has an appearance, a demure, he has a persona and just this aura about him that is going to be a little bit more than just someone that you would just call unattractive. Oh yeah, he just seemed like an old, unattractive businessman. So that is a strike against Skip Hall as a D.B. Cooper suspect, but overall I would have to put him reasonably high on the list. Now, I told you guys that I would conclude this episode with a psychological profile comment, because I've been reading the book The Skyjacker by Dr. David G. Hubbard, and I'm a very slow reader, first of all. And I got to a particular chapter on gravity, and I was like, what on earth is this? This is gravity in a psychological profiling book? Where is the doctor going to be going with this? And it was not a chapter where you could skip around. One of the reasons why I never did that well in school is because I would just do the concept of skim reading or scanning the text for clues, trying to find some important ideas. And I mean, like I had this whole method down where I would just read the text very quickly. I would just skim read it. Then I would decide, what I'm going to do for my papers, and then I would scan the text for specific information that could be supporting points. It's not the best way to conduct your research. And I ultimately had to break out of that mold because sometimes that method doesn't work. Sometimes you have to read the whole thing. And the chapter on gravity in the Skyjacker was so dense. You could not skip around, you could not glaze over everything. Every sentence was building upon the previous sentence. And it's all extremely technical stuff. I mean, it's written by a medical doctor, and it's trying to be an advanced book that is going to discuss the psychological profile of skyjacking. And some of the things that are in the Skyjacker are very intense. They are very abstract. They're dealing with concepts like when I talked about on a previous Cooper Friday, where that the concept of skyjacking is not only literal, it's also metaphorical. Someone wants to be above the earth, literally and metaphorically. They want to use this as a type of superiority in their own mind, and that's why they've chosen to skyjack a plane as opposed to committing a different type of crime to obtain money. Now, to build upon that, one thing that was observed by Dr. David G. Hubbard ties into some types of Freudian psychology, and that is that Sigmund Freud was, of course, very famous for the interpretation of dreams. And an observation that was made by Dr. David G. Hubbard when he looked at a cluster of skyjackers is that none of them had dreams where they were flying. And there are types of dreams that people could have, such as when you're flying or when you're falling. If someone has dreams when they are falling, then this symbolizes neuroticism and worrying and some type of just being consumed with a certain self-doubt, for lack of a better term. And having dreams with flying would be the opposite. And none of the skyjackers that he studied in his sample, which was not the entirety of his research, a very specific group of skyjackers, he found that they did not have any dreams where they were flying. So he's almost like, okay, so they have this type of self-doubt, neurotic thinking, and worrying. Now they want to use the skyjacking as a way to overcome that type of, gravity that is dragging them down. Because again, Freud is all about how the actions and behaviors that you experience between the ages of 0 to 4 model your personality and your sexuality. And one of the first things that a kid is going to experience when they are learning about life is gravity. They're going to try to move and they're going to fall. And then it's almost like they could not break out of this childish-like state where they are falling and they're just constantly falling down, and it develops something that they cannot comprehend because perhaps their parents did not show them a certain type of love and care and compassion that would allow them to walk and ignore this fear of falling, ignore this worrying and the self-doubt. So what they wanted to do was create this level of superficial anti-gravity behavior, which is skyjacking the airplane. Again, literally and metaphorically, figuratively. I shouldn't say metaphorically, it's more like symbolically. They want to be above the earth, they want to defy gravity for a period of moment, and they also want to resist gravity when they are coming down. Now, all of that stuff is abstract. And I know I'm not a psychiatrist. Who am I to challenge somebody named Dr. David G. Hubbard? But a lot of people will challenge Sigmund Freud's observations because what he was criticized of was just focusing too much on connecting the dots in a mental way. And he might be arranging things in patterns that made sense to him, partnered with some real observations, but it's not going to work out perfectly every time, in my humble opinion. It's not like I'm a medical doctor or anything, but I definitely think that that is very creative. It's something that I can comprehend and understand, but I don't think that it's perfectly scientific, if you can follow my unprofessional criticisms. Now we're going to get to something that I think is so much more important, and that is that another observation that was observed by Dr. David G. Hubbard when he was studying skyjackers and trying to create a psychological profile was that there were two characteristics that they had in common. One was that they would walk very vigorously, and the second is what I want to discuss with you guys, that they would like to travel long distances. And you might be thinking, well, yeah, obviously some type of skyjacker is going to get on a plane. They have to be going somewhere, right? No, I don't think that's what he meant at all. I think he meant that they had no problem putting distance in between themselves and their home, in their place of origin, where they were starting out from before they were committing the skyjacking. They had no problem creating a very large amount of distance. Maybe the type of person that would even cross the country to commit a skyjacking. And we do see this with other criminals like Robert Ivan Nichols, the identity theft who stole the identity of Joseph Chandler, the first person to be identified through the DNA Doe Project. Once drove from the Midwest to Maine to go shopping at LL Bean, and once he got to Maine, he tried to park in the LL Bean outlet, but there were no parking spaces, so he just drove back. Crossing large amounts of distances ties into this anti-gravity desire, which is really just self-doubt, narcissism, and worrying. Did I say narcissism? I meant neuroticism, self-doubt, neuroticism, and worrying. And even the serial killer Israel Keyes would also take flights and then move around the country to try and confuse the authorities, having no problem traveling long distances before they commit the crime. So, to come full circle, imagine that, to Duane Weber. This whole thing about, well, he can't be placed in the Northwest area before the skyjacking, maybe that's not so relevant and that's not such a big point to any D.B. Cooper suspect, because perhaps they would have no problem crossing the entire country to go to Oregon to board the plane using the name Dan Cooper. Maybe the distance wasn't an issue because of all of these things that we have just discussed. Do you have any comments about this psychological profiling stuff? And I do have to give a more intense form of criticism to this Freudian stuff about gravity and the falling, and then, oh, well, your parents didn't show you the love and compassion, so you're constantly afraid of falling, you never have dreams about flying, and then you're living in this world of self-doubt and neuroticism, got the word that time. That sounds like a lot of mental conjecture, and I am completely aware that Freud based a lot of his observations on human behavior, and I mean that, observing human behavior, but that just sounds like mental conjecture all the same. It's very creative, it's very stimulating, it's just like, oh my goodness, I never thought of it that way before, and it's very engaging, it makes you very curious, you want to hear more, but stimulation and conjecture don't necessarily equal a strong scientific understanding of the subject. And that's where I'll leave it at that. I definitely want to read more about the psychological profiling of skyjackers. I'm going to incorporate it into Cooper Friday because I think it's fascinating stuff, even if it's not going to work out perfectly with the scientific method. I just want to know more about it. Stimulation and conjecture all the same. All right, well, you guys know where to write the show. blackboxonlineradio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook name is Ned DeHaan. And of course, there is blackboxned88 on TikTok and Instagram, and I use those pages to upload shorts and reels Monday through Friday. They also come out on Facebook and YouTube. You can listen to them right here on YouTube. Lately, I've been focusing the shorts on Jack the Ripper. I've been going through the different Jack the Ripper books, but perhaps in the coming weeks, I'll get back to talking about assorted true crime cases. And thank you so much for listening to this episode of Cooper Friday. That will be all for me now. Until next time.